Canada is making major moves in aluminum, trade, and supply chains as it adapts to shifting U.S. policies and global market demands. If Canada keeps accelerating investment and export diversification, could the North American industrial balance suddenly tip? Canada has announced a significant investment of $1.5 billion to upgrade its Alouette aluminum plant in Quebec, aiming to protect production against the recently imposed 50% aluminum tariffs by the Trump administration. This funding will be split into two phases: $750 million allocated by 2030, and the remaining amount planned through 2045. The Alouette facility, partly owned by Rio Tinto holding 40%, employs approximately 950 workers and stands as a key pillar of Quebec's robust aluminum sector, which currently accounts for around 70% of all North American aluminum output. For everyday Americans, the effects of this investment could ripple through industries relying on affordable aluminum, from cars to canned goods. A stronger Canadian aluminum industry may help stabilize North American supply, potentially limiting price spikes triggered by tariffs. However, as the U.S. applies heavy tariffs, some U.S.-based manufacturers might see higher input costs or supply adjustments. Over time, such cross-border industry moves could influence the prices of durable goods and consumer products in U.S. stores, and even affect job markets connected to manufacturing and supply chains. Canada is shifting its trade focus, reducing reliance on the U.S. market and expanding into new territories. According to the latest government data from May 2025, Canadian exports to non-U.S. destinations rose by 5.7%, while exports to the U.S. fell to levels not seen since the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's trade deficit improved from 7.6 billion Canadian dollars to 5.9 billion, thanks to this strategic pivot. Key growth areas include gold shipments to the UK, crude oil to Singapore, and pork exports to Japan, demonstrating an active approach to market diversification. For American households and businesses, these trade shifts could lead to changes in the variety and prices of goods available. As Canada sends more products abroad, U.S. buyers might experience tighter supply or higher competition for certain resources, particularly in industries like energy, metals, and agriculture. At the same time, reduced Canadian reliance on U.S. demand may influence regional job opportunities and investment flows. These global dynamics could gradually affect the cost of living, especially in sectors tied closely to Canadian imports. Canada is shifting its trade focus, reducing reliance on the U.S., and expanding into new markets. As of May 2025, exports to non-U.S. destinations rose 5.7%, while exports to the U.S. fell to pandemic-era levels. The trade deficit narrowed from 7.6 to 5.9 billion Canadian dollars due to this pivot. Key growth areas include gold to the UK, crude oil to Singapore, and pork to Japan, highlighting Canada's push for diversification. For U.S. households and businesses, these shifts may affect product variety and pricing. As more Canadian goods go abroad, U.S. buyers could face tighter supply or more competition for energy, metals, and agriculture. Reduced Canadian dependence on U.S. demand may also influence regional jobs and investment flows, with potential long-term effects on the cost of living in sectors linked to Canadian imports.
The new spending law changes how Americans pay for education at every level. One provision affects school vouchers with a possible ripple effect on public school funding. Another targets large university endowments, bringing a new tax reality to higher education.
You might get a few $100s back for giving to charity, but you could also lose thousands if your child is aiming for a top university. Trump's new tax law is changing how we fund both education and our communities. The real question is, who stands to benefit and who could be left behind? Starting in 2027, The One Big Beautiful Bill introduces a dollar-for-dollar tax credit up to $1,700 a year for donations to K-12 private school scholarship programs. This replaces the old system of regular deductions. With no federal cap on the total credits available, some experts estimate the government could end up covering as much as $100 billion annually. For families with no children in private school, this means public school funding may take a hit, especially in programs supporting students with disabilities. For example, if a student needs an aide at $20 per hour, budget cuts might reduce that support, directly affecting the classroom learning experience. Also in 2020, universities with large endowments will face higher taxes under the new law. Schools holding more than $750,000 per student in endowment funds will pay a 4% tax. Those with over $2 million per student will pay 8%, a sharp increase from the current 1.4%. However, colleges with fewer than 3,000 tuition-paying students, like Amherst or Wellesley, are exempt no matter how large their endowment. For top universities like Harvard, with an endowment over $50 billion, the new law could cost $200 to $280 million a year, enough to fund hundreds of scholarships or entire research programs. Even schools like Rice University expect to pay more than $10 million annually, roughly the value of 100 full scholarships. To adapt, many universities have started freezing hiring, delaying raises, and slowing student enrollment growth. Families sending students to top-tier schools may notice tighter financial aid, fewer scholarships, and less generous tuition offsets. If you're planning for an Ivy League education, you might need to budget several $1,000s more per year than previous classes did. Beginning in 2026, the law also introduces a charitable deduction for non-itemizers up to $1,000 for individuals and $2,000 for couples. For the first time, over 90% of Americans who use the standard tax form will be eligible for this kind of deduction. That means if you normally give $500 to charity but don't itemize your taxes, you can still reduce your taxable income by $500 and possibly get $50 to $100 back at tax time. It's a practical way to reward everyday generosity. But wealthier donors and businesses face tighter limits. High-income individuals can only deduct up to 35% of their adjusted gross income AGI and must subtract 0.5% AGI from their donation total. For businesses, the reduction is 1% of AGI. Experts estimate this could reduce large-scale charitable giving by about $81 billion over the next decade. If you've noticed major donations from big companies or wealthy individuals to museums, arts programs, or research institutions, those contributions may become less frequent. This could leave some of those organizations needing to pause or revise plans if they cannot find replacement funding.
More Canadians come to America than tourists from any other country. Last year, Canadians made over 20 million visits to the U.S. and spent more than $20 billion here. But this year, many are not coming to America, as I saw firsthand on a recent trip to Vermont, right near the Canadian border.
Canadian visitors didn't say goodbye, they just quietly stopped coming. No more lines of weekend cars at the border. No more cheerful voices at the outlets and cafes. They left behind unused ski passes and a once thriving cross-border friendship that now feels a little strained. Back in 2024, over 20 million Canadian travelers crossed into the U.S., spending close to $19.8 billion. But by 2025, that number is sliding fast. In June alone, cross-border car traffic from Canada dropped 33%, marking the sixth straight month of decline. At a well-known ski resort near the Vermont border, 30 to 35% of seasonal passes from Canadian guests were never renewed. That's 1 out of every 3 visitors gone, and with them, income for local ski instructors, shuttle drivers, and small restaurants. If you've ever strolled through a small town near the border, places like Plattsburgh, NY or Darby Line, VT, you may already notice stores are quieter, cafes closing earlier, or fewer hands behind the counter. For local motel owners and diner staff who rely on guests from Toronto or Montreal, this isn't abstract, it's lost income day after day. The loss of Canadian visitors isn't just a footnote. It's playing out in real time at the register. In Jay-Peak, Vermont, a resort that used to see over 3,000 Canadian season pass holders now has fewer than 1,500 renewals, slashing ticket revenue by more than $1.2 million year over year. Local hotels and eateries have shortened hours or closed 2 days a week just to stay afloat. At the St. Bernard de la Colle duty-free shop, Once averaging 400 transactions a day, numbers have dropped to under 200, dragging revenue from over $100,000 per day in 2024 to under $55,000 now. One store owner put it plainly, "We're sitting on double the inventory because nothing's moving." Even Vermont Bruco, a local favorite with a loyal Canadian following, saw second quarter sales drop 38%. The reason? A case of their popular IPA that used to cost 25 Canadian dollars now sells for over 36. Thanks to import taxes, about an $8 hike per case. Many customers have shifted to Canadian brands like Molson or Bose, which are cheaper and untaxed. If you're a bartender, cook, or receptionist near the border, you've probably already felt the change: fewer shifts, fewer tips, and too many empty tables where Canadian guests used to sit. With cross-border travel in retreat, towns across the northern U.S. are stepping up efforts to reconnect with their neighbors to the north. In downtown Burlington, Vermont, the popular Church Street was temporarily renamed Canada Street for the month of July. Store signs, banners, and even menus now include French translations as a warm welcome. Shops like Maple Lane Boutique and diners like North Shore Diner are offering at par pricing, meaning Canadians can pay in Canadian dollars at a one exchange rate. That can save travelers 7% to 10% on purchases enough to turn a $50 lunch from nearly 70 Canadian dollars back down to face value. There's also a new initiative called Free Canada Day, rolling out in towns from New York to Michigan, offering free admission to local attractions, lodging discounts, and special perks for Canadians visiting on July 1st, their national holiday. Some hotels even promote deals like buy 2 nights, get 1 free for Canadians, a savings of $200 to $300 per trip. These gestures are more than symbolic. For many border towns that depend on Canadian travelers, from gas stations and grocery stores to motels and roadside diners, this is a matter of survival. If Canadian guests keep staying away, the winter ahead could be a tough one.
We're selling it for like 40% more just because it's cost so much to get, right? And there's less in stock because people aren't buying this.
Imagine you're running a small auto body shop. Overnight, steel costs shoot up 6 to 9%. Parts orders stall, and workers are sent home early. Sounds absurd, right? But that's exactly what's happening in Detroit, where Canada's silent strike on procurement rules is rippling through U.S. automotive supply chains. A Michigan small business owner opens his shop, only to find this week's steel delivery is delayed again. He's heard friends in nearby towns having similar trouble. Why are steel shelves suddenly empty? And why do prices keep rising? Recently, the U.S. placed a 50% tariff on imported steel and aluminum from Canada. Using Section 232, Canada chose not to fight back with tariffs, but instead quietly changed government buying rules and increased environmental requirements, making it harder for U.S. buyers to get Canadian steel. This has left truckers, warehouse workers, and steel plant crews in cities like Detroit with less to do. Some are called in for fewer shifts. Others watch overtime hours disappear as prices inch upward. Families start to worry if everyday costs will soon follow. For those who rely on steady pay, this uncertainty makes planning for monthly bills more challenging, and conversations at dinner tables start to shift toward cost cutting. If this pattern stays over the next 2 months, an estimated 1,500 steelworkers and drivers in the Midwest may face reduced hours or temporary layoffs as factories scramble for supplies. Even small changes in work schedules can quickly add up, putting extra pressure on households and local businesses that depend on these industries to keep moving. Chaos. The summer brings an uneasy quiet to assembly plants, where once machines ran day and night. Now some lines sit idle waiting for steel shipments that do not arrive on schedule. Ford reports a jump of $2.5 billion in added costs just since the start of the year, driven by shortages and delays. Steel and aluminum prices have risen between 6 and 9% in the last few weeks, eating into company profits and slowing production across Michigan. Factory managers are forced to cut back shifts, while some suppliers consider temporary closures to wait out the shortage. For households depending on those jobs, a single missed paycheck can mean tough choices about groceries, medical bills, or summer repairs. If shortages continue for another month, buyers could see the sticker price for new vehicles go up by as much as $400 before fall. North. Canada is investing $1 billion Canadian to upgrade its steel industry. focusing on electric arc furnaces and stricter environmental standards. The plan is to make steel cleaner and more attractive for markets like the EU. This push for green steel means Canadian exports could soon find new customers abroad, while U.S. producers may face more competition, especially as electric vehicle makers and large infrastructure projects demand lower carbon footprints. For now, U.S. buyers needing green certified steel may have fewer choices and higher costs. In the next 2 months, the price of certified green steel for U.S. construction or auto projects could climb by $45 per ton, adding pressure to project budgets and renovation plans.
How can we find a way to support each other? And then in addition to that, find a way to get to new markets.
Did you know that the Ford you're driving or the dishwasher you're planning to buy next month might no longer be made in the U.S.? It didn't take a major blow from a foreign competitor. America is weakening its own manufacturing base as more and more major companies quietly move operations north, choosing Canada as their new home. In just the past 18 months, more than $7.2 billion in investment from major players like GM, Ford, Tesla, and Alcoa has quietly flowed into Canada. It's not about cheaper labor, it's about lower total costs. In Canada, industrial electricity runs around 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour, about 45% cheaper than in U.S. manufacturing states like Ohio or Michigan. Add to that, the faster approvals getting a factory built in Canada takes months, not years like it often does in the U.S., especially for industries like clean energy or battery production. One example, Honda is planning a 15 billion Canadian dollars, about 11 billion US dollars, electric vehicle and battery complex in Ontario, backed by major funding from both the Canadian federal and provincial governments. Earlier, Stellantis, which owns Chrysler, secured over 1 billion Canadian dollars for its battery plant in Windsor. So what does that mean for everyday Americans? It's simple. Jobs that might have landed in Michigan or Georgia are now heading to Canada. Each complex like Honda's can mean 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, gone from the U.S., not just factory jobs, but construction work, parts suppliers, and shipping and logistics roles. If you live in a town that's long relied on industry like Toledo, OH or Flint, MI losing a plant might mean fewer diners staying open, daycares shutting down early, or even local home prices falling because no one's moving in anymore. The U.S. decision to raise steel tariffs to 50% has already triggered a real spike in material costs. Right after President Trump's announcement, hot rolled coil HRC, a core material for many industries, jumped about 6%, or $240 per ton. Aluminum, used in everything from food packaging to cars and electronics, shot past $1,279 per ton, up over 20% since January. For automakers, that's painful. A pickup truck like the Ford F-150 or Chevy Silverado now costs nearly $5,700 more in materials alone without any extra bells or whistles. If you were planning to buy a truck for around $45,000, that price could easily cross $50,000. And it's not because the vehicle got better, it's just the taxes. And it's not just about price tags, it's about jobs. In places like Ohio, Michigan, and Georgia, factories are getting fewer orders because they can't compete with Canada's lower costs. Some Georgia plants have gone from 3 shifts to just 1, and reports show over 3,500 workers have either been furloughed or laid off in just the last 6 months. For the rest of us, it shows up in rising prices on anything that uses metal, from soda cans to fridges to washing machines. That $799 dishwasher you were eyeing. Next month, it might cost $850 to $875, simply because of tariffs and more expensive raw materials. While the U.S. wrestles with rising tariffs and shifting investment, Canada is stepping up fast, becoming North America's new high-tech hub. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec are now being called Battery Valley, with massive projects in EV batteries, clean energy, and electronic components taking root. Swedish firm Northvolt is investing $5.2 billion in a mega battery plant in Quebec, expected to create 3,000 to 6,000 skilled jobs. According to Economic Minister Pierre Fitzgibbon, they're tapping into Canada's low-cost hydroelectric grid and government incentives that include extended tax breaks and easier approval processes for key materials like nickel and lithium. Both crucial for battery manufacturing, Canada's strategy is about more than foreign money. They're building a fully domestic supply chain, from mining and refining to assembly and recycling. That gives them protection from fragile global supply lines and an edge when dealing with carbon regulations from the US and Europe. As companies shift north, skilled American workers, especially in tech, engineering, and battery systems face fewer opportunities. And the price of American-made goods may keep rising if we end up importing parts from Canada at higher costs. So if you're wondering why job listings in your town are drying up, or why your next microwave is $40 more than the last one, you might just need to look a few hundred miles north.
Now, according to the U.S. Travel Association, even a 10% drop in Canadian tourists could cost the U.S. more than $2 billion in spending and threaten 140,000 jobs.
You walk into an airport that once buzzed with crowds and excitement. Now, you find rows of empty seats, silent hallways, and closed check-in counters. Sounds dramatic. This is the new reality at America's busiest airports. As airlines and travelers quietly turn away from the United States, there was a time when America's biggest airports bustled. Tourists rushing, constant boarding calls, but since early 2025, over 10 major airlines, including Singapore Airlines, Lufthansa, Emirates, Air France, Play airlines have quietly cut flights to the U.S. without major announcements. Now, silence lingers at O'Hare, LAX, and JFK, emptier waiting areas, fewer staff at check-in, and departure boards crowded with canceled routes. In cities like Chicago and New York, the numbers start to feel real. With 85,000 jobs at risk, families are rethinking how to pay the mortgage, keep up with college savings, or cover medical expenses for aging parents. This isn't just about a drop in tourism. It's a wave shaking the foundations of daily life, sometimes leaving the dinner table quieter, and plans for the future more uncertain. With job losses and shrinking incomes, an average family may have to cut $100 from the monthly grocery budget, often buying less fresh meat, milk, or produce. Multiply that by 85,000 workers. And local retailers and food suppliers feel the ripple, making entire cities more cautious. Higher landing fees, complicated visa procedures, and frosty welcomes at border checkpoints have made even the dream of coming to America less certain. These days, even a pricey business class ticket doesn't guarantee easy entry. Every shift cut, every lost dollar, weighs heavier when there are bills to pay and kids asking for new shoes. With fewer hotel guests, staff see their hours cut sometimes by as much as 6 hours per week. That's $240 a month money that once covered groceries, summer camps, or a weekend meal to unwind from the stress. If this continues, hotel and restaurant workers may need to tighten their budgets even further. Shopping for fresh meat, fish, and vegetables might shrink by up to 20%. That's $50 to $100 less per month for every family working in these industries. Not long ago, travelers from Scandinavia, Korea, the UK, and France would visit America touring colleges, attending conferences, or seeking a new kind of summer. Now, they're picking Canada or Japan, which seem more open and welcoming. With everyday essentials, sales expected to drop by $60 million this year. Shop owners face tough choices. Cut staff hours, reduce orders, or explain slimmer margins to employees. Shelves aren't empty, but aisles often are, making it hard to plan or invest. As international visitors vanish, local milk sales could drop 15 to 20% from last year. Store owners may lose $1,000 to $2,000 in monthly revenue, affecting fresh product quality and supply, and possibly raising prices if supply chains struggle. In past years, city lights in places like New York or Miami burned bright, thanks to international visitors renting short-term apartments, packing coffee shops, bringing energy to every corner. Now, as British Airways, Lufthansa, and Jetstar all reduce flights, 1.5 million visits simply vanish. Short-term apartment rents in former gateways to America are dropping by an average of $200 per month. For tenants, it sounds like a win. But for landlords who relied on that income to pay debt or cover medical bills, it's nearly $50 million in lost revenue. Quietly, faith in the American dream slips a little more, not just in the eyes of the world, but even for those who once thought they'd finally found stability.
The other problem is that the United States is starting to export less agricultural commodities, and that is a lot in part due to Mr. Trump's trade policies.
You spend months nurturing your crops, only to wake up one morning and realize your entire harvest suddenly has nowhere to go. Sounds ridiculous. But that's exactly what's happening across the American Midwest. As China unexpectedly cancels billions of dollars worth of American soybean orders, setting off a domino effect that threatens U.S. agriculture in the middle of a shifting global trade landscape. There were harvest seasons when Iowa and Illinois soybeans sailed confidently to China, sustaining farm families and small Midwest towns. But this week, everything changed. China abruptly canceled contracts for 2.4 million tons of U.S. soybeans. A $1.1 billion blow, soybean prices plunged 8.2% overnight. Storage bins are now 13% fuller. With no buyers, I've never seen my harvest just sit here with no idea what comes next, says a 53-year-old Iowa farmer. The region faces $470 million in lost revenue, impacting not just big farms, but also groceries, tuition, and savings for thousands of families. If the situation continues, average income for Midwest soybean households could drop another $1,200 to $1,800 this year, and about 4,500 seasonal jobs may vanish before the next harvest. The question lingers: who will buy the beans that have fed this land for generations? Not long ago, American soybeans were China's top choice, with Midwest shipments part of rural life. Now, after over $11 billion in Chinese-backed investment in Brazil's ports and railways, Brazil has taken over. Chinese buyers now pay $14 to $22 more per ton for reliable, long-term supply from Brazil, which provides 70% of China's soybean imports. For many American farmers, this shift isn't just about lost income, it's about being pushed aside in a changing world. This year, U.S. soybean exports to China may drop by up to 10 million tons, about 20%, forcing over 6,000 family farms to cut production or risk bankruptcy. Soybeans were once the ticket to a secure future. Now they are a question mark hanging over tomorrow. Is America still an agricultural powerhouse, or quietly becoming an outsider at the world's export table? It's not just soybeans under pressure corn. America's golden crop is feeling it too. U.S. corn exports to China have plunged 79% year on year. China also released 1 million more tons from its reserves to cut reliance on U.S. suppliers. For many Midwest farmers, once hopeful fields now bring worry. As corn prices drop and incomes shrink, tough decisions loom about next year's planning and keeping the family farm going. If this trend continues, U.S. corn prices may drop another 10 to 12% in the next 3 months, slashing profits for middle-aged farmers by $900 to $1,500 per household this year. Over 2,000 small farms might suspend operations or cut acreage by 15 to 20% next season. Some changes come quietly by the time you feel them. They're already woven into the fabric of everyday rural life. Every shipload of soybeans now carries more than a harvest. It represents America's global standing. As China and South American partners develop a new trading system, using less dollars and favoring long-term deals, the U.S. role is fading. Without quick investment in infrastructure and modernized supply chains, American farmers could lose their vital spot in the global market. If no major changes happen, U.S. soybean export value may drop another 15 to 20% next year, costing 8,000 to 1,000 jobs in soybean states. Someday we might look back and wonder, was there a time when America's strength was measured by the price of a bushel of soybeans?